I am Jake.
And Alex.
And welcome back once again. Today we're going to be reacting to a video by Lewis Lovhaug, aka Linkara, of the comic book review show Atop the Fourth Wall. This isn't going to be a comic book review. This is for another sideshow he does every so often called A Quick Look At, where he takes a quick look at stuff, mostly TV shows, and does his infamous top 15 list, because Doug Walker, Nostalgia Critic, does top 11, Lewis does 15, because gotta stand out. Today, this is his top 15 list of the best episodes of the 1980s rendition of The Twilight Zone.
I love a good list and really liked The Twilight Zone, so looking forward to the review today.
I love the original show, and I've seen a few episodes of the 80s version, and a little hokey in some areas, but that's expected of the 80s.
I think that's, yep, absolutely. A little nostalgia there for the 80s.
But still reasonably well done, so without further ado, let's watch and see what he has to say about the 80s Twilight Zone.
Alright.
The original Twilight Zone is probably the most famous anthology series ever made. Not only do many of its episodes still stand up today, but as a pop culture icon, it's still frequently referenced and parodied even 50 years later. However, less talked about is its revival in the mid-80s, created by CBS, partly thanks to the Spielberg movie, but also just by how many people at the network at the time were fans of the original. As such, the series was greenlit, but sadly, like the original, it never became a huge hit at the time it was made. Rod Serling was dead by this point, but we had Harlan Fergan Ellison as a creative consultant and writer, with additional writing from George R.R. Martin and later J. Michael Straczynski. Wes Craven even came on as recurring director for the series, so add that to the list of his awesome legacy. They even had a friggin' fantastic new version of the theme song done by the Grateful Dead. I especially love the opening sting of the theme. It's like that music from Star Trek the Motion Picture. But anyway, like last year with Night Gallery, I'm here to talk about some of my favorite episodes. These are my top 15 episodes of the 1980s Twilight Zone. Number 15, Her Pilgrim's Soul. The Twilight Zone, while being science fiction and fantasy, crosses over into other genres. Drama, western, and of course, romance. The romance stuff tends to be pretty schmaltzy and not really my thing, but then there's this episode. Two scientists are working on a holographic projector and discover the device working on its own, projecting out a fetus that grows into a baby, a little girl, and finally a woman very quickly. They discover that this is the soul of a woman from the early 20th century named Nola, and the lead scientist, Kevin, starts interviewing her about her life, while the other scientist goes out to verify the information they learn about her. Kevin has been having marital problems for a while now, and the two spend the whole episode confiding in each other about their lives, their loves, and the connection the two seem to share. Like I said, I'm not usually one for this kind of thing, but it's executed very well, the music is heartwarming, and the acting is top-notch. Number 14, The Misfortune Cookie. Okay, now this one is just weird because it's not really a Twilight Zone episode. At least not in spirit. This one really belongs as an episode of Tales from the Crypt, from the overacting to the eventual comeuppance of its main character. Elliot Gould plays a snooty food critic who, angry at a food critic on television who gives rave reviews, heads to a Chinese restaurant that she was praising in order to destroy it with a review. He orders a bunch of food, then doesn't even bother to eat any of it. He's just a complete asshole. However, the owner of the place, as a form of apology, thinking he didn't approve of the meal, gives him a fortune cookie that predicts that he'll get some wealth. And he does so. The guy, of course, catches on that the fortune cookie's predictions come true, and thus keeps coming back to take advantage of them without paying, and keeps threatening to give another bad review if they don't comply. Like I said, you can probably guess where this ends up going with him, especially given the Tales from the Crypt comparison, but it's just so enjoyable to see him playing up this complete and utter asshole of a character.
I say means something in this town. I'll be back. With friends.
Look, my reviews have destroyed whole cities.
Number 13, The Burning Man. This one doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's dripping in atmosphere, which I love. It's based on a Ray Bradbury story, and is about a woman and her son taking a drive out to a lake for a picnic in the 30s when they come across a disheveled old man in a white suit. They pick him up, but he keeps talking about the nature of evil and acting crazy, until finally the woman kicks him out. One of the things he brings up is how evil might need to be reborn and rejuvenated. Like Night Gallery, the length of of certain segments varies, so this one's pretty short, as is the child the two pick up later, who also begins talking about evil.
Ooh.
Number 12, Many, Many Monkeys.
Huh?
This was made for the third season, but actually the script comes from the original Twilight Zone. I'll get into the third season stuff later, but it's the connection to the original that's interesting. It was rejected by CBS, the producer of the show, believing that the network found it too grotesque, which I find kind of head-scratching unless the makeup was going to be different. The plot is about an epidemic that begins sweeping through the country from the perspective of a hospital. People are spontaneously going blind. While a scientific explanation for it is offered at one point, one of the patients suspects that people are becoming like monkeys. See no evil, hear no evil, etc. In essence, that people are becoming so uncaring, so selfish and apathetic to others, that we are literally turning a blind eye to others. It seems a little ridiculous, but then you see how selfish and uncaring people act in the episode, and you start to wonder if maybe there's some truth to it, even if they do come up with a surgery to repair the problem. For most people, anyway. Number 11, The Last Defender of Camelot. As I've said before, I'm a fan of Arthurian lore, although I'm quite out of practice with most of it, so this one's right up my alley. In modern times, Lancelot is still alive, granted immortality by Merlin. The wizard is actually summoning him for help, since he's waking up after his many centuries-long slumber. Morgan Le Fay is also still around, and warns Lancelot not to trust Merlin, and we soon see she wasn't kidding. Merlin is rather upset about the state of the world and wants to try again to unite it, except this time with himself as king. Lancelot, now changed thanks to time moving on and the old ways being, well, a bit outdated, challenges Merlin. Morgan even steps in to help. It's not really fully explored, but it's an interesting concept. As much as Arthurian ideas of chivalry and honor are celebrated, there's just as much medieval thinking involved in them, and if you don't change with the times, your own idealism may just be another form of evil. Good stuff, even though the special effects are... yeah. But hey,
It's
bad
TV.
special effects are a Twilight Zone staple.
The
Number
80s.
10, The Road Less Traveled. The best episodes of the 80s Twilight Zone are the ones that seem like they fit in right with the original series.
I agree
and this
entirely
one's no
with that.
different. A family man who had evaded the draft for the Vietnam War begins to experience odd flashbacks as if he was a part of it. He's been feeling guilt over how he dodged it, as if he was meant to go back. And soon around the house are wheelchair marks and visions of a man in said wheelchair, until finally it's discovered that it's another version of him, from a reality where he did go to the war and ended up losing his legs in the process. Needless to say, his entire life has been absolutely miserable, and at first the man thinks that he's here to try to take his life away from him, not an unfair concern in a Twilight Zone episode, but the guy just says he wanted to see all of this, and he's happy that everything worked out so well for him. However, with both sides feeling either guilt or regret over their choices, they share their memories with the other so they can both fully appreciate what the other went through.
Interesting.
Number 9, Monsters. Here's one for all of you out there who were horror fans as kids. A little boy named Toby, who loves monster movies, discovers that his new next-door neighbor is a vampire. However, it turns out a lot of vampire lore is inaccurate. They do need to drink blood, but garlic and silver and sunlight are not actually harmful to them. The guy's just old and wants to live out the rest of his days in peace, and there are not many left. See, the real downside of being a vampire is that regular humans actually have a complete aversion to vampire kind. Their presence awakens some kind of genetic illness that gets people sick until they mutate into monsters themselves that will attack and destroy the vampire. And yep, our vampire neighbor knows that and has come here to die.
Ralph
Number 8,
Bellamy?
Crazy as a Soup Sandwich. According to the DVDs, this was the last episode of the show, although Wikipedia lists the order differently. The third season of the show was not really meant to exist. The show was effectively canceled at the end of the second season, but the third season was made by a different production team so that the show would have enough episodes to be sold into syndication. The season has a different narrator, Charles Aidman for the first 2 seasons, Robin Ward for the third, who sadly just isn't as good, which is a feeling for a lot of the stories in this season. Most of them feel very much by the numbers, with plot twists you can see coming a mile away, and just a general feeling of laziness. However, there are some gems like this one. Harlan Ellison Nelson actually did come back to write this one. It's a comedy, which is especially telling to its quality because Twilight Zone, both in the original and this series, was not good in comedy episodes. There was an occasional decent one, but for the most part, they were more eye-roll worthy than funny. In this case, the plot involves a gangster on the run from a demon he made a deal with, eventually going back to a mob boss for protection. It's a pretty unbelievable story, but the mob boss buys it, and so we have this bizarre and hilarious clash of styles, the melodramatic demon and the stereotypical mafia butting heads. It's hilarious and wonderful.
Interesting mix.
Number 7, a small talent for war. Another short one, but a good one. A fleet of alien ships arrive and address the United Nations, informing them that their species created humanity millions of years ago, much like they created life on many other worlds. And they're here to tell them that humanity has not met with their expectations. They have a small talent for war. Their technology is not as advanced as it should be, that kind of thing. As such, they plan to wipe out humanity and start over, but the American ambassador gets them to extend the deadline by 24 hours to give them a chance to prove their worth. The aliens agree, and over the next day, they quickly work to bring about world peace, hoping to show that humanity is not as barbaric and uncivilized as they believed. But unfortunately, maybe the aliens should have been a little more specific about their expectations.
The talent
Number 6,
for war is what they
Shelter
admired.
Skelter.
Oh.
This episode feels a bit ahead of its time, and yet also fitting with the period. If you wanted a textbook example of toxic masculinity, you look to this episode. A man who lives with his family has built a fallout shelter in their basement, and he is obsessed with surviving nuclear war, constantly talking about how life will be better after the bombs drop. He rants and raves about all the immoral, useless people who will die and be discarded. He teaches his son how to use guns while seeming to ignore he has a daughter at all, to the point where, when it looks like war has finally happened, he begs his wife to only send his son back if she isn't going to join him in the shelter. But yeah, a nuclear explosion occurs, and he and his gun-selling friend are locked inside the shelter. Unfortunately, the radio tower that was supposed to be used to keep them informed of any broadcasts is accidentally left out during the explosion, destroying it and cutting them off. They survive in the shelter for months as they pile up garbage, power slowly depletes, and the friend realizes just what a crazy asshole this guy is, still talking about how much better life will be when they do finally leave the shelter, even though the radiation hasn't gone down despite how it should have by this point. In the end, the man is left all alone, buried in his shelter. But I won't spoil the ending. Needless to say, he's exactly where he belongs.
I'm guessing hell.
Number 5, memories. A therapist who uses hypnosis for past life regression comments to one of her patients how she thinks it would be better if people could remember all of their past lives. How much more calming and agreeable people would be with one another if they had all those experiences. However, she wakes up the next day to discover just that very thing happening. Except the world is a bit of a hellhole like this. See, the problem with having those past lives is that they remember everything. Every wrong that's been committed against them and by who. So grudges endure from one life to another. If they have a crappy current life, they're more inclined to commit suicide in the hopes that their next life ends up better off. And all the traumas and psychoses they experienced in the past carry over into the new ones. I admit I don't really believe in past lives and reincarnation, but it's a pretty intriguing premise, and this episode is fairly original in that regard. Not trying to tell a love story or something with the premise, but just of how a world like this might operate. Number 4, Dead Run. A trucker having some difficulty finding work as of late gets a job with his friend for some rather unusual cargo. People. Or rather, souls. Yes, it seems the afterlife is not exactly all that great, especially when it comes to hell. See, hell is a bit of a bureaucracy, but not in the extreme way you would expect from the Twilight Zone, just that they constantly need to expand it out as more and more people are being hauled there because the rules haven't updated in such a long time. John Delancey plays a manager of hell, and he does so beautifully, putting up a convincing argument about how this is just the way things work, and you could get in serious trouble if you don't play by the rules. Which our trucker is less than enthusiastic about. Speaking of Star Trek and John Delancey, check out an early appearance by Brent Spiner at the end. Oh, and hey, look, the House of the Book, aka the Command Center from Power Rangers. You were in Star Trek too. Neat. Number 3, to see the Invisible Man. In a totalitarian future, you can be punished for any number of crimes, including not showing enough concern for your fellow man. In this case, our main character has been found guilty of this, but his punishment is to be labeled invisible. A mark is put on his head to alert everyone around him that he is invisible. You cannot interact with him, look at him, or acknowledge his presence in any way. At first, he scoffs at it, since he hates having to interact with people and thinks he can get away with anything. But, of course, people need interaction. They need to be social. And it just gets worse over time. Hell, even when he tries to indulge in loathsome acts like going into a women's locker room, he quickly feels ashamed and disgusted with himself, and of course, the people there do see him and are just all the more uncomfortable by it. It's not a permanent sentence, and it's a good lesson in humility, but the end result of all that is that he truly is more compassionate and caring, even if it means more problems for himself. Number 2, Shatterday. This one's the first episode of the show, based on one of Harlan Ellison's own short stories. Bruce Willis plays a man who accidentally dials his own phone number, and he answers on the other end. Yes, somehow he's been split into 2 people. Naturally, both are a little confused about this, but soon a battle erupts over which of them should be the true version of them. The one at their home takes steps to improve his life, making up with his mother, refusing to engage in unethical business practices, and just generally being a better person, while the one we started with slips more and more into sickness, trying to come up with excuses why he never tried to improve beforehand. It's a great character piece, and a reminder that sometimes the better man really does win through. Before we get to number 1, I should mention a few other episodes of note. Something in the Walls, a creepy 3rd season episode about a woman who claims the patterns on her walls contain beings that want to take our place. Button, a rather famous episode about a device that, if you press the button, someone you don't know will die, but you'll get a bunch of cash. However, upon watching it, I felt the performances went so over the top that it detracts from a fantastic premise. The Mind of Simon Foster, an episode with a great premise, but doesn't really explore it to its fullest, about a future society where you can sell your memories at the cost of losing them completely. Like I said, it just doesn't go far enough with its ideas, especially concerning a person's lost identity as they lose their experiences. There are also a number of remakes of old Twilight Zone episodes, and none of them are all that good. Probably the best is a remake of Night of the Meek, but that's because it sticks closely to the original. Plus William Atherton playing an asshole, which we always love. The remake of A Game of Pool has probably the most problems, from bad casting to bad music choices to going with the original proposed ending for the story, which was a terrible ending, turning a story about the unnecessary sacrifices of trying to be the best and to be careful what you wish for into just, yeah, you didn't want it bad enough. There's also a remake of The After Hours, which had potential to push the horror farther, but like others, it didn't go far enough, and I ended up thinking the original was creepier. And my number 1 favorite episode of the 1980s Twilight Zone is Dealer's Choice. A group of friends have gotten together, including Morgan Freeman, to play poker. However, they soon discover that one of them is in fact the devil, who has come for one of their souls. This episode is brilliant, from the simple premise of the devil playing cards with a bunch of friends to just how great the dialogue is.
Yes. Oh, man. Give us a break, will you? It's one thing being a devil, it's another thing being a total jerk.
Like I said earlier, the best episodes of the show are the ones that would fit right in with the original Twilight Zone, and this one would have been one of the greatest. I especially love how casual they are about the whole thing, even though they know how big the stakes are.
What's going on? Nick's the devil and Peter's playing. How much? $19.
If you're only going to watch one episode, watch this one. It's funny, it's tense, it's the Twilight Zone. Although I recommend watching the entire series. Sure, some episodes are better than others, but it's definitely more hits than misses. It was indeed worth stepping back into this other dimension for this little footnote in television known as the Twilight Zone. But if you want to see some other stuff spotlighted, come back on October 1st and every day in October for Long Box of the Damned.
pretty fun list.
Yeah, I agree. It brought back. I definitely watched some of those. I don't remember any of the specific episodes, but you definitely get that vibe. And I agree with him in just how the 80s version of the Twilight Zone did stand enough on its own in terms of its quality. I think what I like the most about it is you have so many different genres involved, and he mentioned that in his review there, that there are lots of different short stories, so you didn't have to do a ton of development of each one of the stories, so you could dip in and out of a lot of different storylines, and you had the cameos there as well of some of the some bigger names that could pop in for a story.
Yeah, totally. The way it planned out, I guess I haven't seen every episode, but I've seen a couple and I like it. It's a lot better than Tales from the Dark Side.
Mm.
Mostly being that this is clear this Twilight Zone has a budget that Tales from the Dark Side never had.
Mm.
And I watched Dealer's Choice recently. It really moves along and you have to kind of just go with the flow, but yeah, it's got a good pace, and it's the thing that makes I think most episodes work are the performances of the actors they got.
Yeah.
And yeah, Wes Craven directed many episodes, and he's a really good director for doing quick fun, whether it being horror or other genres.
And I remember he had also mentioned in the review, I remember that he just talked about how not all of them were hits. And I remember that when I was watching it, when you went in to watch an episode of The Twilight Zone, you'd probably get one good nugget from the show, and then the rest of them you'd still watch, but they were so-so. But you'd have really one good one that draw you in each episode.
Yeah, there's a couple of episodes, also the original show from the 60s, that are not that good, but for every bad Twilight Zone, there's like 5 good ones.
Yeah.
And what do you think of the picks he chose for this one?
I think they were all worthy. Again, not remembering the specific plot lines. I think he chose some ones that probably would stand out amongst the representation, and highlighting some of the bigger cameos as well inside of his list.
The ones that stick out are obviously Dealer's Choice, because it has Morgan Freeman before he was famous.
Yeah.
It also has M. Emmett Walsh, who's a great character actor. Dan Hedaya as the devil, who he's a naturally slimy actor, so he plays slimy characters well. So it's a good fit for him. And the other black guy is Garrett Morris of SNL.
Mm.
Also, the episode about to see the Invisible Man, about the guy who can't be seen by anybody.
Yeah.
That seems like a really interesting and sad premise.
Yeah, a lot of them are very interesting concepts. I mean, my favorite would probably be the vampire one that he talked about.
Yeah.
But just a lot of interesting, and because they keep them short, you don't get tired of it. It doesn't get too much. They're not relying also on the special effects. 'Cause special effects, they were terrible. I mean, between the alien ship and then some of the the fighting there, the shooting. I mean, it wasn't about the special effects. It was about the characters. It was about the plot lines. And if you keep it simple enough, you can completely rely just on that. So,
personality goes a long way, and also the episode about a small talent for war, like. Some episodes in the first 2 seasons would have, like the airings, would have 2 episodes in one.
Yeah.
Sometimes 3, where you'd have one that's 20 minutes and then 2 that are like 10 minutes. Which is different but interesting. And some episodes that didn't make the list that are good include Eye of Newton. It's an 8-minute episode starring Sherman Hemsley as a right around the time the Jeffersons ended.
Yeah.
As a math professor who can't solve a pretty impossible equation. So he goes, I'd sell my soul to figure this out. We hear a whoosh sound, turns around, and we see a demon, horns, going, 2 words, babe, eternal damnation. We in business. And it's only 8 minutes, but it's a really well done, extremely well acted battle of wits, where this demon says because he said he'd sell his soul, he now has to go through this little game. The only way out is he has to ask a question that the demon can't answer, or give him a task he can't do. Those are his only ways out. So he has to really think hard and pay attention to the little details.
And I really think that's what made this format work, and why they were successful in rebooting the format. Well, successful in a couple of seasons in rebooting the format from the original, just because it's a formula that really is able to showcase that, and it doesn't rely on big budgets. And then people, if they're in between projects, they can kind of cameo, they can kind of do an episode, and they're not committed, to an entire series. So,
yeah. Like Bruce Willis, Ralph Bellamy, all these people.
Mm-hmm.
And
I agree. Also, he made a point about the 80s soundtrack being spooky, and I agree with that. That kind of the intro to it.
the intro,
I remember that for sure.
the intro is great, and I have it here as well,
Mm-hmm.
by the Grateful Dead. Oof.
Mm-hmm.
Eee. Rod Serling.
Yeah. And I was a little kid at the time, so these were that was the borderline scary part,
Yeah.
I seem to remember, and maybe you can look this up after, but this was paired maybe with Unsolved Mysteries, and they kind of did like a mystery and Twilight Zone kind of theme night at one point, but who knows? My memory may be off.
Well,
I may have watched them together, being in the mood.
you're an 80s kid, you know better than I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great theme, it's a great intro. The music is its own thing. Has a good, very electric feel to it. And then they slip in that brief sample of the original to pay tribute.
Which is great.
There was one other, actually there have been two others, but there was another reboot of the Twilight Zone in 2002.
Yeah.
It only lasted one season. It was hosted by Forrest Whitaker. Great actor, but it only lasted briefly, and it's hard to say. Like, I haven't seen as much of that one as I have the original in the 80s.
Yeah.
But
I remember watching a few episodes of that one as well.
something that a lot of people criticize is the intro for the 2002 version, which many people think is horrible, and I agree. And just in case you forgot, here it is, and the music is done by Korn.
No? I did like the Korn back in the day. It's very early 2000s for sure. See, I don't hate it, but
My issue is I can't hear shit
Yeah.
over the music.
I think that's production versus. It did update it a bit. Maybe I'm biased because I was a fan of Korn, but oh well.
And there's that new one that's on CBS All Access, hosted by Jordan Peele.
That one I haven't watched.
Me neither, so I have no comment.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was a good list by Lewis Lovhaug. He really put a lot of thought into it, and I like how, even though it would have been okay here, he chose not to spoil the twist of the episode.
Yeah, that was nice because I think really what this is, there's so few people that probably remember specific episodes like myself that even may have watched it originally. It gives enough of a taste to get you back in the mood to go watch the show itself. So without having any spoilers inside of there, I think this could probably stimulate people's interest to go back and find them, because you said they're all available at this point.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what his intent was in making the list, is get people back into this and watch some of those.
It's a big love letter to something he enjoys, and
Yeah.
can really respect that. Lewis is a great retrospective video maker of old TV shows. He does comic books most of the time, but when he really wants to give his opinion or just highlight an old show or movie,
Yep.
he's pretty good at it.
Easy to do when you're passionate about something. Yep.
And he's also got a good calm voice to talk through it.
I agree.
So, good video.
Absolutely. Good source material, good review.
With it being the October season and
Yeah.
pandemic, good time to binge the old Twilight Zones.
Nothing says October like Twilight Zone. Like a good Twilight Zone.
And last thing I'll say, I appreciate how, even though he was long dead at this point, they still credited after the intro, created by Rod Serling.
Yeah, even in the third iteration of it.
And from what I've seen, they did that with I haven't seen an episode of it, but I did look up the new intro,
Mm-hmm.
and it looks like the Jordan Peele version does it too.
Huh? Yeah.
Because, hey, he was the creator.
There are very few formats that celebrate that short storytelling kind of style, and this is one of them that did it really well from the very beginning.
Well, hope you enjoyed this, and we will see you again soon.
Good. Enjoy.